I'll do the same. I'm talking with you today from New York City, and this is the land of the Lenape here in New York. So I'm pleased to be with you all today. I want to just share in early March, when the coronavirus pandemic was just a shadow on the horizon of this country, my grandmother passed away at the age of 83. As soon as I heard the news, I didn't think twice. I immediately got on a plane to North Carolina to spend time with my family, to grieve, and to celebrate her life. We shared meals together. We hugged, we cried, we laughed. We honored the matriarch of our family. Little did I know when I left a few days later that it would be the last opportunity that I would have to see my family for months, to travel, to hug people, to eat and gather around a table, or to do any of the countless simple joys that this virus has taken from us. When I think about that time, I can't help but wonder, if I had known how bad things were going to get, would I have acted differently? Would I have held my mother a little closer, knowing it would be months before I see her again? Would I have savored the home cooked meals a little bit more? Probably, for sure. Would I have taken more time and effort to heal those old family wounds that now feel so trivial? Given what I now know, with my loved ones for months relegated to FaceTime calls and Zoom calls on my computer screen, I'm sure I would have done all of that and more. But that's what a crisis does to us. When the world around us starts to crumble, when death suddenly looms in front of us, the everyday troubles fall away. Suddenly there's a sense of clarity and a focus on what really matters, our families and our communities. Before the pandemic hit, we already knew that 2020 was going to be a big year to contend with. We knew this was an election year. We knew we were preparing for a fight. And we thought that maybe that would be our biggest obstacle. Now, on top of that, we're focused on the day-to-day survival, on trying to keep our family and friends alive in the midst of a devastating pandemic, and so much more. The truth is this: we're facing a triple pandemic. First, there's COVID-19, the deadly virus that has swept the globe and upended millions of lives in the United States because of the government's negligent and dangerous response. Second, there's the economic fallout from the pandemic, with millions of jobs lost, lines at food banks growing by the day, and small businesses around the country shuttered for good, disproportionately those in communities of color. And beyond all of that, there is a third and arguably more devastating crisis: the pandemic of white supremacy that has infected our society so deeply that Black and brown people have not only endured the most devastating financial losses of the pandemic, but are also being hospitalized and dying at rates far higher than their white peers. For Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color, white supremacy has been the pre-existing condition that has exacerbated every other pain. But for the time, in this time, for as long as I can remember, I've been thinking about what they call everyday America, or middle America, or white America. It seems like for the first time, a lot of folks are waking up to this pain in those communities. With death sweeping the nation, there's a sudden clarity. What we are experiencing for the first time in my lifetime is a vast collective suffering, a vast grappling with death, a pain and isolation, a loneliness, a fear that has left few communities untouched. Fear for our lives, fear of the unknown, fear for our organizations, fear for our families, fear and scarcity mindsets. When I think back to my grandmother's funeral, I realize how lucky I was to be able to gather with the people I love to bid her farewell. For the millions around the world who have lost loved ones in the last few months, many of them have been robbed of the most basic human dignity, the right to grieve and to say goodbye. In the middle of all of this, with the number of cases increasing and increasing, the death toll rising, we then saw the horrific murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. Y'all, we literally saw it. As many of our loved ones lay in hospital beds struggling to breathe because of a deadly virus, A healthy young man who had survived COVID himself lay choking in the street under the knee of a white police officer. The pain and suffering that Black people have experienced for generations spread across this country as the video of Floyd's death went viral and uprisings for racial justice around the country began. For once, even those folks who have been protected and have been sheltered from maybe being untouched by suffering of the masses in the past, they even could not look away from this pain. And many more begin to see that because of white supremacy, they too are dying in vastly different ways, but yes, we are all impacted by this. As a nation, George Floyd became our brother, our son, taken away by the insidious virus of violent racism. And so we took to the streets, thousands of us, Black, Indigenous, Latino, white, with a simple but powerful slogan: we are done dying. In the midst of the national tragedy that is the pandemic, the motto of the movement for Black lives, we are done dying, became suddenly brutally clear for thousands, for the millions who marched down city streets and country roads. We are done dying. Whether consciously or not, the idea was felt widely and embraced around the country. We as a nation were finally done. We are done with COVID-19 and constant death. We are done with the lack of response from the federal government. We are done with the division. We are done with the anti-Blackness. We are done with police murder. We are done seeing our kids being dragged down the hallways of schools by police. We are done with the lack of investment in our communities. We are done with not having enough and not having what we need. We are done with the broken promises of the government and every single broken treaty. We were done with our destitute so-called democracy. Now, this isn't all a sad message today, because what is coming from this collective exhaustion and this national breakdown for me is something that I think is very beautiful, rising from the ashes, a different type of solidarity than I've ever experienced. Seeing the multiracial unity and the solidarity for the movement for Black lives, seeing the response, the mutual aid funds, the memes, the tweets, people opening their doors for tear gas protesters, the millions on the street night after night, has made me see that deep down below our messy, dysfunctional national surface, there is a human bond, a commonality where we know as human beings that we have to take care of each other, and that we can't solely rely on philanthropy or charity, and that we can't rely on this federal government or the police. When push comes to shove, all we truly have is each other. It just took a national crisis for us to see it. But this collective moment wasn't just a sentimental outcry or a cheesy Hallmark commercial. It has become a call to action. Across the country, cities became battlefields as thousands put their bodies on the line to say enough is enough. Social media was inundated with demands for justice. Celebrities spoke out. Government officials were heckled and called out for doing too little for too long. The White House itself was surrounded by people demanding the best of a nation that has for too long promised too much and done barely enough. And it is working, y'all. Politicians in major cities were forced to commit to defund the police and reinvest in our communities. Large corporations were called out for not doing more than branding around Black Lives Matter. People were publicly shamed and lost their jobs from making racist phone calls. What so many people said was impossible or could never happen started happening. After decades long of organizing and an outcry from the Native community, the Washington national football team was forced to retire its racist name. Many, many wins we are seeing in this moment that really inspired me. And even in philanthropy, which has been historically slow to embrace change, a transformation is happening. People have begun to realize that just giving is not enough. We need to be redistributing wealth to the front lines for the fight for racial justice, and using our financial power to heal centuries of injustice. In the book, I wrote about a 10% tithing about 2 years ago. which many people told me was nothing but a pipe dream. But suddenly, even that idea has become a concrete reality with a few foundations who have let me know that they are actually trying to figure out how to do this, how to give 10% of their endowments to communities of color as reparations to use the wealth to support our communities in a self-determined way. Y'all, this is unprecedented. But now, after the sounds of protests have faded, after the Instagram posts and website banners have been taken down, when the streets are empty, but for the painted Black Lives Matter slogans, I'm starting to wonder, was it enough? As the election nears, with a white supremacist on the ballot, stoking the flames of racism across the country, are we really ready as a nation and as a sector to confront decades of racial injustice and centuries of harm caused by colonization and white supremacy? Yes, the officers who killed George Floyd were arrested and charged, but he is still not here with us. The officers who killed Breonna Taylor and so many other unarmed people remain free, oftentimes still patrolling the streets, their hands at their holsters. Black and brown communities remain ravaged by COVID, unable to pay rent, and all the Senate could do was go on vacation. In my community, Native communities across the country, we've been hammered by this pandemic. It will be generations probably before we recover. As we near the election, and as the country begins to battle the triple pandemic of COVID-19, its economic toll, and the white supremacy that underpins all of it, I'm thinking through what it means for us to come to this awakening. That as a country, we're dying, and that we've had enough. And when someone is dying, the things that seem important before begin to feel trivial. If you were given a diagnosis by a doctor that you only had a few months to live, many would choose to reprioritize their lives. You would begin to center people and relationships. You would apologize for harm and wrongs and mistakes that you've made in your past. You would tap into your spiritual life and want to make sure your soul was right. You would want to reconnect with folks that were estranged. This is where we are right now, and why we as the independent sector must lead in the work of healing. Death is all around us, and what truly matters is coming into focus. We need to look critically at the past, not to reopen old wounds, but to acknowledge and to heal them. For the people who have lived with the gaping century-old wounds of white supremacy and colonialism for so long, we need a chance to heal. And for those who maybe have never felt that pain, who have benefited from inflicting that pain, they need to ask, how can I be a part of this collective healing? What will I have to give up so that we all can heal? But not everyone is going to ask these questions. Not everyone given a few months to live would undertake this kind of evaluation. Looking around that much is clear. One version of our country is dying, wailing in its last throes, kicking and screaming its racist tantrums until the end, with deadly consequences for the rest of us. But that is not who we need to be. What if we all agreed we didn't want to return to the way things were, but embrace the connectivity that we felt so deeply in these months? What if the clarity we've gained through this deadly pandemic could be carried through to a new and better future? What if we could be reborn as a new country, one no longer steeped in white supremacy and weighed down by the trauma of colonialism? What if we embraced our humanity, this fragility of life that the pandemic has so brutally exposed, and brought that thirst for the here and now, that focus on what truly matters into our relationships, into our work, and into our worldview going forward? I think that would mean that our communities, our workplaces, our families, our cities, our sector, our country would be reborn to something better. I think it would yield the impossible becoming possible a lot more often. And I think the things that we think would never happen before could start happening. If we could collectively heal, it would be like getting a new lease on life. We would be less selfish. We would look outwards at the needs of others and decenter ourselves. It would be a different type of solidarity, a grown-up solidarity. It would be a different economy, a new and better society, a stronger, more inclusive sector, a better country. As we stare down death now in the coming months, May we believe that the healing we all seek is possible and make it so. Thank you.